Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Can We Have a Virtual Word webinar. My name is Natasha and I'm Events Coordinator at CMI. I'll shortly be handing over to David, who is running today's session. If you have any questions during the webinar, you can ask them using the live chat box and we shall answer as many as we can at the end. Today's session is being recorded and will be made available through Management Direct. Now over to David, CHMC Assessment Manager at the Chartered Management Institute.
Hi everyone, and welcome to this webinar. Today I want to talk about difficult conversations, what makes a conversation difficult, and some tips and tricks for dealing with difficult conversations. And I want to focus mostly on remote conversations, having those difficult conversations in the way we all are nowadays, remotely and through whatever medium you tend to use. So first of all, I think it's really important to understand what makes a conversation difficult, and some of the things that we need to think about, some of the things that get in the way of an easy conversation can be the message. What is it we want to talk about? Is it uncomfortable? And when we think about that, is it uncomfortable for us or is it uncomfortable for the other person to hear? And I think that's really important to clarify. Sometimes the people are what gets in the way. We might be having to give a difficult message to somebody who we find difficult to deal with. They may find us challenging and difficult, and that can get in the way as well. We have to think about the situation. What is it that we're trying to achieve, and why are we having this message in the first place? Sometimes it's a lack of clarity that gets in the way of a conversation being easy. We're not sure why we want to have the conversation or what it is we're saying. Sometimes it can be down to the medium. Are we doing this in person? Are we doing it on the phone? Or like everyone is at the moment, are we doing this through technology? And indeed, when we think about that, sometimes it's the technology that gets in the way itself and causes us problems. We're doing things at a distance now, and that's often an issue as well. That can often make it difficult to have a conversation that's quite serious content to it, because we are looking at a computer rather than looking at a person. And then on top of that, there's all the things that you can't see. And there's something really intrinsic about warm bodies in a room and the way that live people give off signals and react to things in terms of body language that we're not seeing when we're dealing with people in a remote situation. And we need to bear all these things in mind, because these are the things that will get in the way and stop us from having a successful, challenging conversation with someone. So on the other side of that, then, when we think about successful conversations and we think about having a successful, challenging conversation in particular, we need to take a few things into consideration. We need to make sure we prepare, and especially prepare as to where we're going to begin. Often the hardest part is starting the conversation. And once we start that, it will flow, it will generate itself and take over. But we need to make sure that we have somewhere to start. And if we fluster that, then often it will go downhill from there. So that's the key things: prepare, especially where you're going to begin. When we're thinking about technology, know what your plan B is. If the medium that you're using breaks, what's your backup? Because we can't leave people in limbo. If we've started a difficult conversation, we need to make sure that the system that we're using is robust enough to cope with that, or we need a backup in terms of, okay, if this doesn't work, we'll go over to Conferoo, or we'll pick up the phone, or we'll try a different medium, but we will keep this going. The worst thing you can do is leave someone in limbo. We need to know what our interests are and the essence of what it is we want to say or what we need to say. And I make that distinction between what we want to say and what we need to say, because often it's two different things. And I'll come back to that in a bit more detail a bit later in the webinar. We need to know when to say it. When are we going to say this? And timing is everything, really. We need to make sure that we've got the time to say what we need to say. And importantly, the other person's got the time to hear what we want to say. And we're not saying things on a Friday afternoon that we're going to pick up on a Monday morning, for example, or last thing in the evening that we're going to pick up the next day, because we don't want the person that we're talking to worry about what it is that we have to say to them until we've said it. We don't want them to build up a picture and tell themselves a story that isn't necessarily true and isn't what we want to say to them. But if we leave gaps, we leave time, we leave breaks in between, we'll all just fill in those gaps ourselves. And believe me, if we fill in those gaps, it's never going to be positive. If we're always looking at the dark side. That's human beings, because that's how we survive. That's how we protect ourselves. We need to focus on the issues and not the personalities. What is it that we want to correct or challenge about this individual? And it's not personalities, it's to do with work, it's to do with the topic that you're dealing with, and it's really important to focus on the issues. If we don't focus on the issues, we can end up with a position where we're saying to ourselves, I really like this person, this is out of character, but I'm going to let it go. Or I really struggle to work with this person, so I'm going to be extra brutal, not consciously, but subconsciously, just because I find this person a real challenge. I find them scary, so I'm not going to deal with the issue, and I focus on the personality, and that's a real mistake. And more, especially when we're working remotely, we need to create an environment based on trust, and we need to create an environment in which we can be compassionate and stay on task, and that the other person can listen properly and appropriately. Now, that's a real challenge when we're working remotely. We'll talk about that a little bit more in a second or two. We need to think about the issue, as I said, and we need to talk about the issue that is at hand. And we need to make sure that we're not dealing with too many issues at one time. What we don't want is a shopping list. Don't go in with a shopping list where you're going to say, I don't like the way you do this. You've not done that on time. This is never done to my standard, blah, blah, blah. Bang, 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 bang. Think about what's important. Think about what's going to get the change in attitude, the change in behavior that you're looking for. Separate the people from the problem. This is not a problem with Paul or Sue. This is a problem of an attitude or a behavior or missing performance deadlines, all those kinds of things. But we're not dealing with the individual and trying to change them, as I mentioned before. We need to be very, very clear about why we want to have this conversation. And this is one of the things you need to take the most time about, really. Why are you having this conversation? What is it that you want to be different after the conversation than before the conversation? Now, that can be a lot of things. That can be about performance. That can be about attitude or behavior, as we've said. It can be that what's going to be different is this individual is no longer going to be with us. It can be that much of a challenging conversation. So we need to think about that. Why are we having it? What do we want the outcome to be? We need to think about what we're trying to achieve from that. Are we trying to achieve a change in behavior? If we are, what does that look like? If we're trying to achieve a change in attitude, again, if we are, what does that look like? How will it be different? And how will we know that that person has changed and has listened to our difficult conversation? Now, I'll talk a little bit more about confrontation as we move through this as well, because that's a slightly different thing to think about. If we're dealing with confrontation, still a challenging conversation, but the outcomes may well be different. We need to think about why we're having this conversation, and that's really, really the key thing. So I would stress that above everything else. And if you don't know why you're having it, don't have it. You're not ready to have it. Be very clear about that. If you don't know why you're having the conversation, what you're trying to achieve, and what's going to be different afterwards, you're not ready to have that conversation. And that's the same in life as well as in the workplace as well. So that's my tip for the day, really. Consider the environment, and especially remotely. Are you talking to people who are in an environment where they can listen to what you have to say? What does your environment look like? What is your environment in terms of noise, in terms of other people in the room, in terms of what you've got behind you? What can people see that's likely to be to put them off the message? If you've got kids at home and you're dealing with this situation, can you ask the kids to stay out of the room while you deliver this message? If it's a challenging message for you, it's going to be a challenging message for people to hear. And the last thing you want to be doing is dealing with kids running around. If you've got the water board digging up the road outside, make sure you have this conversation at a different time. You need to have an environment that is respectful for the conversation and respectful for the other person. More so remotely than any other time, because you're missing those body languages. All those things that you talk about are not there, and all they're going to focus on is your face and the words. And if everything's going on in the distance around you, then that's going to put off the message, it's going to put you off, it's going to put the receiver off. So be very careful about that. But we can't always control that, and equally when we're talking to somebody else, we can't control what's going on in their environment. And sometimes it is about saying, look, I need to have a serious conversation with you. It would be really useful for both of us if you could move into a room where it's just you Is it possible to take your laptop into a room where it's just you? Or is it possible for the next 15 minutes to ask everybody else to leave the room because we need to have a really serious conversation? And there's nothing wrong with saying that. And equally, if the person says, no, I can't do that at the moment, that's not possible, okay, let's not have this conversation now. When is a time where that would be possible for you? And let's rearrange this meeting and let's have that conversation then. And certainly when you're arranging the conversation, unless it's a snap conversation in reaction to something that's happened that you have to deal with straight away, I would say, I want to have this serious conversation with you. We will be talking about some challenging issues. Can you try and make sure that you're in a room where that's an appropriate environment to do that? And both of us have a responsibility to make that happen. When you're having a challenging conversation or any conversation, it's really, really important to be open and honest. Don't try and fluff things. Don't try and put a spin on it. Be open up, talk about what it is that you need to talk about. If you have a responsibility in that to make things change as well, talk about that. Get the other person to be honest. We need both sides to be open, honest, and constructive, because this isn't meant to be a battle. This isn't meant to be, you need to do this, you need to do that, you need to do the other, or else. That's not what this is about. This is about having sensible adult conversations where we can affect change. We can work together to have a difference after we've had this conversation. We really need to think about who we're talking to, what we know about that person and what they know about us. What do we think we know about that person? How are we anticipating they're going to behave, for example? If we're in a position of power and authority, we need to use that carefully and wisely. And we need to make sure that we're constructing a conversation that's built around trust, built around being equals in this conversation, if not necessarily in the organization. If we go into a challenging conversation and we're basing that on power, I have the power, I will tell you what to do, when to do it, and this is what's going to happen if you don't. That's not a conversation, that's a telling, and that's not where we want to be. That's not helpful. It's not going to allow the other person to grow. It's not going to listen to their input. So we need to think about, how am I going into this? Think about what they might say, how they might react. Don't build yourself a story around that. Don't go up that ladder of inference and get yourself into a position where you're going into that meeting, going into that situation with a predetermined outcome in your mind. Because again, that's going to stall the conversation. It's going to be a one-way telling rather than a conversation that is constructive, creative, and gets you to where you want to be. Think about, what can the other person see? And I don't just mean your background here or your environment, but if you're on a laptop or a tablet, where is the camera looking? Is the camera looking up my nose? Is the camera looking at the side of my face if I've got two screens? Am I looking at the camera? Are they looking at the camera? Are they and I present in this conversation? Now, this is a really interesting one, because if you come to a conversation, you can't bring your whole self to it. Don't have the conversation, especially a difficult conversation or a challenging conversation. You need to be completely present. The other person needs to be completely present to hear. And this goes back to when you set it up. As I said earlier, can you be in a quiet room? We need to talk about this seriously. I need you to listen. I need to listen to you, because this is a two-way thing. What we don't want to be doing is a situation where again, yeah, okay, yeah, I've got a couple of minutes, so let's just, no, I just want to tell you what I need to tell you, and then we'll crack on. And you need to be present, you need to be listening, you need to be fully attentive to what the other person is saying, to their body language, because you want to be able to see them. If you can't see them, this is not a good time to do this. Make a time when you can see them. Now, obviously, if you're reacting to something that's happened, you really need to deal with it. You might have to go with what you've got. Life isn't perfect, that's what happens. But whenever it's possible to do so, you want to see and be seen and be completely present. Think about what could go wrong. Think about the unexpected as well as the benefits. Think about the benefit of having this conversation. What will it look like afterwards? Think about the benefits of having it now. What would happen if I don't have it now? And only postpone it if you think it's going to sort itself out. So that's a real big question for you as well. If I leave this, is it really going to get better? Or am I just sticking my head in the sand? Am I just ignoring it because I don't want to deal with it? Think about what could go wrong. Think about what could go wrong in terms of you and the conversation you're having. Think about what could go wrong for the other person. And when I say go wrong, I'm not really thinking here about emotions. There will be emotions. Sometimes the person you're talking to will cry. Sometimes they will get upset. Sometimes they will rant. Sometimes they will vent. Sometimes they will act in a way that you think, whoa, I wasn't expecting that. But I would say expect it. Think about how you would receive the message you're giving. Think about any flip sides of the message you're giving. So if I take your message and I turn it round, is the other side of that message appropriate? Just think about what it is you're saying and what you're not saying, because it can be interpreted, or every message can be interpreted in two ways. What does a good outcome look like? We've talked about that a little bit. What do you want from this, and what will it look like, and how will everybody benefit from this happening? Think about what happens if the tech breaks. Have you got that sorted out? Think about your plan B. Again, I always go on about plan B in these things. Think about what your plan B is. I've done enough of these with the tech stopping, lag, breaking down, people disappearing. Am I talking to myself, or are you all still out there listening to me? How do I know? Well, that's your plan B, really, isn't it? Think about your plan B. Think about what follow-up you need to provide from this. So do you need to provide additional support? Do you need to provide training following this conversation? Do you need to provide a follow-up in email? And I would always say yes, always follow up in email, just to clarify your understanding. Because one of the things that we get from being with people, we get that sense of a clarification, we get that sense of understanding, just as we get the sense that somebody in the room, there's an awkward feeling in the room when somebody is not happy. You don't get that through technology. So we need to just follow up, check that clarification, little email that says, following our discussion this morning, this is my understanding of it. If yours is different, can you let me know? So we're all on the same page. We know where we're going. All those things are really important. And make sure you've planned in time to deal with that as well. Now, all of those things are really, really important in difficult conversations, challenging conversations, and in conversations in general. So I want to focus on a couple of things now as we go through the rest of this. One of them is feedback. If you're giving feedback, think about what's missing when you're working remotely. Again, focus on the situation, the issue, or the behaviour that you hope to change, rather than the person. We're not getting into changing people. It's their behaviour we might be changing. But if you're giving feedback based on the fact that if you were 6 inches taller or 2 years younger, you'd have made a much better job of this, that's going to go nowhere. That's just going to cause problems. And people will pick up on subtleties of that faster than you can say them. Recognise where somebody has achieved. Recognise their effort if they've not achieved, or if indeed they have achieved. Recognise that achievement. Recognise that up front. Recognise that at the end. That's all building up to where we need you to go. This is a journey, not a destination. Think about how we're using that effort and those accomplishments on the journey to where we need you to be. Be specific, be future-oriented, and be timely. Think about your SMART objectives that you're setting here. Think about enjoying joint problem solving. This is an issue for both of us. If you have a problem with somebody's behaviour, somebody's attitude, somebody's deadlines, they're not going to have the same problem as you. They're not going to have the same urgency necessarily to change as you are. So we need to think about what's the benefit of this for both people. And when we say build them a golden bridge, let's give them, let's have a win-win here. Let's make this positive for them as well, especially if it's a feedback about performance. Make it positive for everybody. So when you're giving feedback, remember that on the other end of the screen, there's a human being. You're talking to a monitor, you're talking to a tablet or a laptop or a camera. The person you're talking to is very much a human being. They're going to feel vulnerable, they're going to feel elated, they're going to feel sad, they're going to feel angry, whatever it might be. But there's a human there, and you need to remember that, because that's really important. Invite them to give you clarification, questions, maintain that two-way. Make sure that's going on all the time. This is what I'm saying. What do you think? How do you think we could change this? What would you do differently? Take a coaching approach to this rather than a telling approach. Acknowledge they've got concerns, and be present when you're doing that. Help them move forward. Active listening is really, really important when you're doing things virtually. If you're taking notes, say, I am listening to you, but I'm just going to take notes, because the worst thing you can do is head down like this and, nobody knows what's going on at the other end. All they're seeing is the top of your head. So think about that. Think about the environment, as I've said before. Is it suitable for what you're doing? If not, let's change it. Let's change the environment, change the timing, change the medium if we can. All these things are really important to think about. When you're receiving feedback, as much as is possible, treat it as a gift. Treat it as the gift that keeps on giving, you know. Don't take it personally. Take you out of it if you can. Look at the situation, look at what you're being asked to do as calmly and as constructively as possible. It's really hard to take feedback sometimes if it's negative. So think about that as well when you're giving feedback. If I was receiving difficult feedback about my performance, how would I want to receive it? Think about that when you're giving feedback. If you're receiving it, active listening, think about what your needs are. Okay, I've listened to what you've said. What I need now is some support in order to achieve that. What I need is time to take that in. What I need is some follow-up. Maybe I need some training. How together can we get to a place where you want me to be? So it works both ways. You know, you're not just giving this message and having this construction. Sometimes you're receiving it as well. And it is really important to remember that. I want to move on now to a little bit of what's known as transactional analysis. And it's, you know, that phrase, it's not me, and sometimes actually it is. And if we think about what our parents might have said to us when we were children, you know, it's not necessarily what you say, it's the way you say it. And that's really important to remember as well. And there are generally 3 states when we talk about transactional analysis, or what's known as the ego state model. And the first one of these is child state. And child state puts us in a position where we're really feeling all those raw emotions. We're angry, we're having fun, we're affectionate, we're sad, we're deeply in love, you know, or we're in the grips of terror. It's all the basic emotions that we see in children. And if we're acting in this state, and this will change from second to second, from day to day, from minute to minute. If we're acting in this state, we're not really in a place where we can hear what's going on properly in a way that's going to be constructive. We will either be really angry, you know, I'm not listening to you, you're not making any sense, I don't want to do this, or we become very dependent, and that's not a good place to be. So if you're feeling in this state when you're about to have this conversation, put the conversation off for 10 minutes. You know, say to the person, I just need to take 5 minutes. Can we postpone this for 5 minutes? What you never want to do is leave them waiting, because that's just really rude and that sets a really negative atmosphere to start with. So if you do need to postpone, make sure they're aware that you're postponing. The other state that's difficult to deal with is what we call parent state as well. And this is all about rules. And I say rules and hugs because really that's what it's about. It's about the moral lectures. It's about, you know, if you want to be under my roof, you do as I say. Well, that's not going to get you anywhere. It doesn't get you anywhere with teenagers, from my experience, either of having them or being one of them. It doesn't get you anywhere at work, and it doesn't get you anywhere generally. That kind of thing's not good. The other side of parent state is about, I want to make this better. I want to give you a big hug, you know. And if you're in that state when you go into a difficult conversation, especially if it's about work, especially about performance, there's a risk that you might slip into, oh, well, do you know what? Don't worry about it. I'll sort it out. Don't worry. That's fine, you know. No, let's not get upset about this. Oh no, don't worry. I'll put it right. That's okay. And it really is that metaphorical way, you know, we'll sort it all out. Don't you worry. It'll be fine. And that's a really bad place to go into a conversation where you're giving a negative message or a positive message about a negative situation. So be very careful about that. What state are you in? Are you feeling like that? If you are at that particular moment in time, again, avoid the conversation. Now, the best possible state to be in when you're having these kinds of conversations is what we call adult state. And adult state works from a logical, rational place. We're working with facts, we're listening effectively, we're considering facts, we're evaluating behavior, we're encouraging the other person to be part of this. We're taking that very much coaching stance, if you like, and we're working together to come to an outcome that we both, that would be valuable for both of us. So if possible, this is the state that you want to be in. Now, none of these states are fixed. As I say, these will change from minute to minute, from second to second. And it's really important to recognize that. You know, at any one moment, you may be in adult state. Somebody may say something to you, and your initial reaction to that is to drop into child state or to drop into parent state. And that's not wrong, but just try and recognize it. Try and recognize where you are. Try and recognize bringing yourself back. And this takes practice, you know. The first thing is recognizing it. The second thing is accepting it and then dealing with it. So don't beat yourself up if you fall into these states and you see yourself falling into them, but you still can't do anything about it. Because that's who we are. That's humans. That's life. You know, I talk about this sort of thing. I fall in and out of these things all the time. We are human beings. We need to be kind to ourselves. Now, sometimes your message is about confrontation, and sometimes you just need to get in the ring and battle it out with somebody in an appropriate adult way. Now, saying you come across behavior that is absolutely unacceptable, you need to confront that behavior. You need to try and understand that behavior. You need to define what the behavior is and what the change is that you're looking for. You need to search for a solution, and you need to come to some agreement. So we call this kudza, and this is a really useful tool, I find, because it takes the personalities out of this. You know, and you have to work hard to take the personalities out. As I said earlier, that's really important. You know, we don't want to get in a position where we say, well, you act like that because you're, we've gone into child state and we're looking at personalities. So that's not where we want to be. We want to be doing this from an adult state. Just a useful tool for you to think about. Before you go into a scenario, think about how you've dealt with that before. Have you got any related experience of dealing with this particular scenario with different individuals in different situations? Where might you begin that conversation, or where might you best begin that conversation for each individual scenario? Think about the things you'd watch out for. Think about what your word choice is. Am I using words that are appropriate to the person who's receiving this message? Am I using words that are appropriate for the situation, for the environment that I'm in? You know, if we're in a professional environment and we're dealing with professionals, swearing probably isn't the right choice of things to do. If we're on a shop floor or on a building site, for example, I'm massively, you know, overplaying this, I guess. But if you think about the situation, the environment, think about words that will make the most impact in an appropriate manner. And that's the key, an appropriate manner. Think about your tone of voice. Think about your non-verbals, and this is much more important when we're thinking about remote conversations. Think about your non-verbals that are missing, especially if you're doing this on the telephone. Where you're doing this where there's video and you can see each other, you pick up some of those non-verbals, but not all of them, because some of them you have to be in a room. They are very much felt non-verbal communication rather than witnessed non-verbal communication. So think about that. Think about how you're coming across. You know, are you sitting here all locked up, or are you open to suggestions? Is your body language open or closed, or aggressive or welcoming? How is that coming on? How are you looking? The mirror is going to be your best friend in this, because the last thing you see is the first thing the other person sees. So are you dressed appropriately for this conversation, for the workplace, for the environment? As we move into the summer, is wearing a t-shirt an appropriate thing to do when you're having a serious, challenging conversation? Maybe, maybe not. I leave that to you to think about. Think about the environment you're in. Think about the people you're dealing with. Talked about what's behind you. Talked about what you're looking at. Bear those things in mind, because again, the last thing you see is the first thing somebody else sees, if you can see it. If you've got a tablet and the tablet is on your desk and you're looking down at the tablet, they are looking up your nose. It's not an attractive view. If you've got two screens, they might be looking at your ear. If you're reading off one screen and your camera's on another screen. So just bear all those things in mind. And some concluding points for you. There's a lot I've talked about here today, but some things that you need to be really aware of. Really. Think about the timing. Waiting to talk only makes it more difficult unless it will resolve itself. So you need to make that dynamic decision. Should I talk to you about this? Have I the right to talk to you about it? Is now the right time? Can I bring my whole self to this conversation at this moment in time in an adult state? If not, can I do anything to postpone it, to do it at a more appropriate time when I can give you more of me, when you can give me more of you? You know, if I've got something going on in my life that's terrible, I can't hardly deal with it, that's not the time to be having a difficult conversation. And we need to allow that with the other person as well. Now, that's not an excuse. That's not saying I don't want to ever talk about this. That's saying I can't talk about this now. I can't have this conversation now. okay, when can you have it? Because this isn't going to go away. We're going to deal with this. We're going to confront this situation. When is the best time for you to have that conversation on both sides? Recognize why you're having the conversation. If it's a challenging conversation, it's more likely going to be about transforming the situation and transforming relationships. And we want to have that trust there. We want to have constructive interactions with people based on trust, based on mutual respect, so that we can change things. You know, the days of confrontation between hierarchies in an organization hopefully have gone, and much more so now we're all working remotely, because nobody's stomping around the corridors. You know, nobody's coming in with that presence of power and authority that they used to do years ago. So think about that. We need much more trust between ourselves, mutual respect to get things done. Always follow up with an email. This is what we talked about. This is what we're going to achieve together. Not this is what you're going to do. This is what we're going to achieve together. Think about all the things that are missing. Think about the non-verbals. Think about the body language that you're not picking up, the signals that you're not picking up. Always, always, always have a plan B. That's the input for me. So I'm going to hand you back to Natasha, who I think might have some questions for us.
Thank you, David. We have had a lot of questions come through and lots of engagement in chat as well, which is great to see. So we've got some questions that came through just before the session, which we've got one from Mahenda, who's asked, what's the most valuable lesson you've learned from the current COVID-19 situation?
I think expect the unexpected, and also remember that because you're working at home, it's not your workplace transported to home. It is different. It is a different environment. It's a different location. You know, make sure you can make the difference between the two, whether that means starting and stopping at particular times, or having a space that's purely work or purely non-work. So it's not just, I've taken my desk out of the office, I've plunked it in the front room, and it's the same but different. It is different. And I think it will continue to be different as well.
That's great, thank you. And Richard's asked just for general tips on creating a safe space for participants to talk openly and candidly about their feelings, and not just around work stuff.
I think one of the things to think about is put the shoe on the other foot and think, what would I want? What's a safe space for me? And then encourage other people to do the same thing. So it's going to be a calm environment. It's going to be quiet. If you have children at home, if you have pets at home that you can keep out of the room for that period of time, then I would suggest you do that. Now, that's not always possible. And sometimes it's about, as I said earlier, sometimes it's about delaying the conversation or delaying the interaction with the other person. And that's completely valid. That's perfectly fine to do that. But wherever possible, think about what would I want if I was on the other side of this, and then try and encourage other people to do the same thing.
That's great, thank you. And Phil has asked, if disciplinary procedures are required, what is the best way to actually initiate this or avoid this being started during this period? Should we hold off disciplinary procedures during COVID?
I think the question is, I think it's a really good question, and thank you for that. I think the issue for me is, what would you do if we weren't remote? What would you do if it weren't COVID? Now, I've worked remotely for years, literally years and years and years. And I think if something needs to be dealt with, it needs to be dealt with at an appropriate time. And that is as close to it happening as possible. If we put things off because of COVID, what we're saying is we accept this behavior. If you don't challenge behavior, you're saying accept it. So think about how you would do it in a face-to-face live situation, and mirror that remotely. So if you are going to discipline somebody, do they need support afterwards? So if they will, then we need to make sure that's in place. So if you were going to discipline somebody in the office and you were going to say, right, this is the situation, this is what we need to change, all the things we've talked about today during this presentation. And what I suggest you do now is I've lined somebody up for you to talk to in HR so they can tell you what's going to happen next. If you would do that, for example, in the office, make sure that you have that person waiting, ready to take up the follow-on from the meeting that we've had. Make sure they're online, ready to go. anything you would do in real life, do to make sure you can do that remotely. If you can't, and you won't always be able to do that, you're going to need to put extra time into it to make sure that you can support that person after you've had the basis of that conversation.
That's great, thank you. So we have run a little bit over time, but we are just going to take a couple more questions before we end the session. So Kieran's asked a good question, which I think is one that many people might have at this moment. Is it appropriate to record this conversation that you're having? You know, if you are having it by Zoom, Google Hangouts, do you record it?
It's appropriate to record the conversation if both sides have agreed and both sides are aware. What you don't want to do is get into a situation where you're secretly recording and not letting the other person know, because that will lead to distrust and that will lead to difficulties later on. So if you want to record it, I would say to the other person, what I'd like to do is to record this conversation. That will save me taking notes, and we'll both have a record of it. I will share the recording with you after this session is done. Are you happy to proceed on that basis? Now, if the person says no, we're into a whole different conversation about why. Can you tell me why that is? Because they may be in a position where they're not feeling comfortable. They may be in that child state and all they want to do is swear at you. So think about that. But as long as you get agreement from both sides, I would say yes, record it. It's no different to taking notes.
That's great. We've had a few comments in chat as well that actually reflect the same thing we've just said. So it's good to see that we're all on the same page as managers.
Yeah.
So our final question, I'm just trying to select one that maybe will be a good one to end on. So Sean said that on Friday, HR had sent an email to someone in his team saying that he had to attend an investigation the week after. Now, obviously, he wasn't very happy about this because it was a Friday, end of close on Friday. So does he have a point? Is there actually a good time to ever schedule in these meetings to send them out?
I'm not going to comment on individual actions because I don't know the whole story of what's gone on there. But I think there is an appropriate time to send it out, and it's certainly, for me personally, it wouldn't be Friday afternoon. And I think the reason for that is you need to put yourself in the other person's shoes. And if I say to you, I want to see you first thing on Monday morning, I may have in mind actually that you've been doing great work. I want to give you a raise. I want to promote you, whatever it might be. You've gone away and thought, that's it, I'm done. They're going to sack me Monday morning, because that's the way humans behave. That's all about protecting ourselves from lions rather than kittens. And I think it's really important to think, what would the other person think? Where will their head be? How are they going to react to that? So rather than a Friday afternoon, I would be saying on a Thursday afternoon, if necessary, or preferably a Thursday morning, we need to have this meeting next week. This is what the meeting is going to be about. It's going to be at 9 o'clock Monday morning. However, I'm here to answer any questions. If you've got any concerns or you want to discuss this, not the bulk of the meeting, but if you want to understand a bit more about why the meeting's taking place, then we can discuss that, so that by the time you go home from work Friday afternoon, or ideally this afternoon, Thursday afternoon, you're very clear about why we're having the meeting, what's going to happen, what the process is going to be. Now, for me, the other person on the other side of this deserves that as a matter of respect. You know, we're not putting children on the naughty step here. We're not saying, oh, if you do this, you know, that's not what it's about. So give them time to take it in, give them time to prepare, give them time to understand why you're doing this. And certainly Friday afternoon is not a good time to do that.
Absolutely, and as a reflector myself, it's nicer to have that time where you have the ability to ask questions if you need to clarify anything beforehand. So thank you very much, David. That's it for today's session. Thank you to everyone who's joined us, both on YouTube and on LinkedIn. If you are a member of the CMI, you can access Management Direct, which has a whole range of practical resources to help you apply your learning from today. And for anyone new to CMI, or those of you that haven't heard of the Management Direct portal, it's full of personal and professional development opportunities, including 400 videos, recordings of sessions like today, 5,000 ebooks, and much, much more. You can get 10% off your first year's membership to CMI by joining by the 31st of May and using the code So thank you again and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you, David.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Natasha.